I was harvesting in my garden yesterday evening and I saw my first cabbage moth of the growing season. Now it's mid-April in Zone 6B here in Missouri, and this is about the time of year that we start to see these cabbage moths show up. So in this video, I'm going to share what exactly the cabbage moths are and 3 different options for how you can combat these in your garden. So first, what are cabbage moths? Well, here where I live, they are white moths. Now, they look like butterflies, and so when you first see them flying around your garden, you might be like me and think, oh, that's so lovely. I'm already attracting butterflies to my garden. Do not be fooled. These are not our friends. They will absolutely destroy our brassicas. So they're going to be white moths. They fly around. You'll see them periodically stop on your brassicas, and they're going to lay their eggs. So what are brassicas? The brassicas are going to be your kales, your broccoli, your cabbage, Brussels sprouts. These all fall underneath that brassica category. And so for me, I mostly have this issue on my kale and on my cabbages. And if you don't catch these eggs, which then turn into caterpillars early on, these things can absolutely destroy your brassicas. It is pretty amazing how quickly the tiny caterpillars can eat through the leaves. So they lay their eggs on the leaf, and then within 2 to 4 days, those eggs are going to hatch. So you do have a little bit of a window there. Now, when they hatch, they're going to be these tiny green caterpillars. They're really hard to see because they're so small. And of course, they're green, so they blend in with the leaves. And over the course of a couple weeks, they're going to be eating your leaves, and they're eventually going to turn into big green caterpillars. Now, you will know that you have this problem, even if you don't see the cabbage moth, because sometimes it can be hard to actually catch them. But you will notice some holes starting to form in your leaves. So in my time as a gardener, I found 3 different options for getting rid of these cabbage moths or deterring them completely. The option that I find to be the easiest is to cover your plants for the spring growing season. So for this, you're going to need a fine mesh. Now, cabbage moths are pretty big, so you could get something with holes even a little bit bigger than this. I just go with a fine mesh because I use it to deter other pests as well. So you're going to need a fine mesh, and then I use adjustable hoops. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know that I also do this in the early spring for squirrels. So I usually plant out my garden starting in early March, and because of the Midwest temperatures and weather, I actually will put frost cover over my containers for a good part of March. That also deters the squirrels. Now, when early April rolls around and it's getting a little bit warmer and the frost cover is maybe making it a little bit too warm within that container, I will then switch out to the mesh. And so I did this a couple weeks ago. It's mid-April right now. And again, it's mostly for the squirrels, but it does help keep away those cabbage moths. I eventually uncover them. I actually just uncovered my containers a couple days ago, and I'll get to what my method is now that they're uncovered for keeping the cabbage moths away. But if you wanted to, you could keep them covered the whole season. I just prefer not to for an aesthetic reason. But I really love these adjustable hoops because you can add pieces to them and make the arches bigger as the growing season goes on. And so as your plants grow, you can make these bigger as well. I've actually owned these for several years now, and they've lasted really great. So adjustable hoops is something I discovered later on in my gardening, but it's definitely something that I recommend if you're wanting to cover your plants. So one way is to just cover them. Now, it's easy to cover them with containers because you're going to have edges. And so I get some just big clamps that I will use, and I will use the clamps to clamp the mesh down to the side of the container. And then when I need to water them or check them out, I'll just, take the mesh off. It's pretty easy. So that's probably, I think, the most effective and the least time consuming way of protecting your brassicas from the cabbage moths. The next option that you see a lot of gardeners choose to do is to use BT and spray it on their brassicas. Now, BT is a naturally occurring bacteria, and so it's okay to spray it on your brassicas and then later on eat them. It's not a chemical, it's a totally natural material that you are putting onto your plants. And what you can do is you can buy it in these spray bottles. It's already, pre-mixed in, so it's not a concentrate, and you can just spray it onto your leaves. And what this does is when the caterpillars hatch and they take their first couple bites of that leaf, when it has the BT on it, it's actually going to kill the caterpillars. And so they won't be able to grow and destroy your leaves. So BT is one option. Different people have different feelings about it, even though it is natural. Some people still don't like putting it on their plants. And the other thing with it is when it rains, which it tends to do a lot in the spring, especially where I live, you will have to reapply it. And so it's just something that, is going to be a little bit more time consuming than if you would choose to cover the plants. but it's definitely an effective option. So that is something you could go with. You would spray once or twice a week. And then again, if it rains, you're going to want to put it on after that rain. But that's an option for you as well. It's relatively inexpensive. Now, the third option, and the one that I'm choosing to do this growing season, is to actually manually check your leaves and take the eggs off. They come off really easily. You just brush them off with your finger. And this is a good option if you're someone who is wanting to be checking your garden on a daily or every other day basis. So for me, I'm a container gardener. I have a smaller space, so I don't have rows and rows and rows of brassicas. If you're someone who's gardening on a larger scale, this might not be very feasible for you. But because I don't have a lot of different plants, I do have the time to check all the leaves every 1 to 2 days. And when I check, you just want to, give it a quick glance, make sure you're looking at the stems and anywhere else that the cabbage moth might have laid the eggs. And, the other thing is if you're harvesting these different, especially the kale where you can harvest it and it keeps growing, that's going to help keep it easier to be checking for the eggs. If you're just constantly taking the leaves off, that's less leaves for the cabbage moths to lay their eggs on. So I go through and I check and I manually take them off. Now, like I said, the egg is going to hatch within 2 to 4 days. So you do have a little bit of a window if you're not checking your plants every day. As long as you're checking them every 3 to 4 days, you should be able to either take those eggs off or be able to get the little tiny caterpillars. And again, I just use my thumb and just scrape them off. And so that is what I opt to do. And that's just because these containers are in my living space. And this time of year, we do like to come outside a lot because the weather's finally getting warmer. And so I don't want to cover my containers. But if I didn't care, I would opt for that first option of covering them with mesh. That's just going to be the least time consuming, but going through and manually checking is an option as well. Now, I do travel a bit, and so if I'm going to be gone for more than 4 days, I will go ahead and cover up my containers just so that I don't even have to worry about any pests. So if you're someone who isn't planning on covering your plants, but you know that you have an extended trip coming up, you may want to consider doing that on a temporary basis. So those are your 3 options for dealing with the dreaded cabbage moth. I really recommend trying one of those 3. I've been growing brassicas here in my container garden for 7 years, and I've always tried at least one of those 3 every growing season. And while sometimes I do find holes from the cabbage worms, if you are just staying on top of it, you will be able to deter them from your plants and be able to get a really great brassica harvest. I hope you have a great growing season and are able to keep those cabbage moths off of your plants.